Welcome back to Horror Vault channel, where you will get to watch only true happen scary and spooky real horror stories happen with everyday people around us. In this video, I will explain 3 true Christmas season home alone horror stories that haven't happened in the past with people like you and me. So, without further delay, let's hear those stories. Story number 1. Unexpected break-in. On a cold winter night, a young woman named Sarah was home alone, preparing to celebrate Christmas with her family the next day. She had just finished wrapping gifts and was feeling the warmth of the holiday spirit as she settled down to watch a movie in her cozy living room. The soft glow of the Christmas tree lights filled the room, creating a serene atmosphere. The first disturbance. As Sarah began to relax, she heard a strange noise coming from the back of the house. It sounded like glass shattering, but she dismissed it as her imagination playing tricks on her. After all, it was late, and she had been up for hours preparing for the holidays. However, as she continued to hear odd noises, scratching and faint thuds, her unease began to grow. Determined not to let fear ruin her night, Sarah decided to investigate. She grabbed her phone and cautiously walked toward the source of the noise. As she approached the kitchen, she noticed that the back door was slightly ajar. Her heart raced. She distinctly remembered locking it earlier in the evening. The shattering glass. Just as she was about to close the door, a loud crash echoed through the house. Startled, Sarah jumped back and quickly turned on the kitchen light. To her horror, she saw that a large glass pane from the kitchen window had shattered completely, shards scattered across the floor like glittering confetti. Panic surged through her as she realized that someone, or something, had broken into her home. She dialed 911 with trembling hands, whispering urgently to the operator about the situation while trying to remain calm. The operator assured her that help was on the way, but advised her to stay quiet and hide. The search for safety. Sarah quickly moved into the living room, shutting off all lights and hiding behind the couch. Her mind raced with thoughts of who could be in her house and what they wanted. She could hear faint footsteps moving around in the kitchen, accompanied by muffled voices that sent chills down her spine. As she crouched in silence, Sarah recalled stories she had heard about home invasions. How intruders often search for valuables, but could also become violent if confronted. The thought made her stomach turn. Suddenly, one of the voices grew louder, and Sarah could make out words. "Where are you?" The voice was deep and menacing, sending waves of terror through her body. The confrontation. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost, Sarah heard sirens approaching in the distance. The sound grew louder as they neared her home. In that moment of distraction, she mustered all her courage and quietly crawled toward the front door. As she reached for it, she heard heavy footsteps coming closer. Someone was approaching. In a desperate bid for survival, Sarah flung open the door and bolted outside just as 2 police officers arrived at her house. They quickly apprehended a man who had been rummaging through her belongings in search of valuables. He had entered through the broken window and hadn't expected anyone to be home. The officers handcuffed him and escorted him away while assuring Sarah that she was safe now. Aftermath. Once inside again after giving her statement to the police, Sarah felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. The shattered glass lay strewn across her kitchen floor like a reminder of how quickly safety can turn into danger. The officers helped clean up some of the mess before leaving, but warned Sarah to always ensure her doors were locked and secured. That night marked a turning point for Sarah. What should have been a peaceful holiday celebration turned into a nightmare that would haunt her for years to come. She installed security cameras around her home and took extra precautions whenever she was alone. Though she eventually found comfort in knowing that help had arrived just in time, Sarah would never forget how close she had come to facing true danger within what should have been a safe space. A chilling reminder of how fragile security can be during even the most joyous times of year. Story number 2, Late Night Knockers. The true horror story of the late night knockers took place on Christmas night in a quiet suburban neighborhood in the United States. The Johnsons, a family of four, had just finished their holiday celebrations and were settling in for the night when their peaceful evening took a terrifying turn. Around 11:30 p.m., as the family was preparing for bed, they were startled by loud, aggressive knocking at their front door. Mr. Johnson, thinking it might be a neighbor in distress, cautiously approached the door and looked through the peephole. To his shock, he saw two unfamiliar men standing on his porch, their faces partially obscured by hoodies. Alarmed by the late hour and the stranger's suspicious appearance, Mr. Johnson called out, asking who they were and what they wanted. The men responded vaguely, claiming they needed help with their car. However, something about their tone and demeanor felt off, raising Mr. Johnson's suspicions further. Mrs. Johnson, sensing danger, quickly ushered their two children, aged 8 and 10, into the master bedroom and locked the door. She then called 911 to report the suspicious activity while her husband kept watch at the front door. The family's dog, a German shepherd named Max, began barking furiously, adding to the tense atmosphere. The men outside, seemingly deterred by the dog's aggressive barking and the family's refusal to open the door, retreated after a few minutes. However, the family's relief was short-lived. About 20 minutes later, just as they thought the danger had passed, the knocking resumed, this time even more forceful than before. The men outside had returned, and their demeanor had become more aggressive. They began shouting demands to be let in, claiming they knew the family was home. Mr. Johnson, his voice shaking, warned the intruders that the police were on their way. This seemed to agitate the men further, and they started attempting to force the door open. The sound of wood splintering filled the air as the family huddled together in terror, praying for the police to arrive quickly. Just as it seemed the door might give way, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. The would-be intruders fled into the night, leaving behind a damaged door and a deeply shaken family. When the police arrived moments later, they found no trace of the men, but discovered clear signs of an attempted break-in. The officers later revealed that there had been a string of home invasions in nearby neighborhoods, all following a similar pattern of late-night knocking followed by forced entry. In the days that followed, the Johnsons learned from their neighbors that an unfamiliar van had been seen circling the area earlier that day. It was suspected that the men had been scouting for potential targets and had chosen the Johnsons' home, believing it to be an easy mark. The incident left a lasting impact on the family. They installed a security system, reinforced their doors and windows, and for months afterward struggled with anxiety and sleepless nights. What should have been a joyous holiday memory became a haunting reminder of how quickly safety can turn to danger, even in one's own home. This true story serves as a chilling reminder of the importance of home security and the potential dangers that can lurk even in seemingly safe neighborhoods, especially during holiday seasons when many homes are targeted by criminals. Story number 3. Strange man outside the house. On a chilly Christmas Eve, a 9-year-old girl named Emily was home alone with her mother, who had stepped out for a last-minute shopping trip. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that often feels eerie when you're the only one there. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Emily settled down on the couch, surrounded by the glow of twinkling lights from the Christmas tree, watching her favorite holiday movie. Suddenly, she heard a faint noise coming from outside, a sound that resembled a cat meowing. Hopeful that her long-lost pet had returned, she jumped up and rushed to the window. But what she saw sent chills down her spine. Standing on her patio was a tall man with disheveled hair obscuring half of his face. He was making high-pitched sounds that echoed eerily in the still night air. The encounter, frozen in fear, Emily watched as the man leaned down and began to eat from the ashtray left outside, spitting out remnants of cigarette butts. His eyes were wild, and brown liquid dripped from his mouth as he continued to make those unsettling noises. It was as if he had lost all sense of humanity, reduced to a primal state. Panic surged through Emily as she realized she was alone in the house with this strange figure outside. She quickly backed away from the window and ran upstairs to her room, locking the door behind her. Heart racing, she grabbed her phone and dialed her mother's number, but there was no answer. With trembling hands, she called 911 instead. "There's a man on my patio. He's acting weird," she whispered urgently into the phone. The operator assured her help was on the way. But as Emily lay in bed under her covers, she could still hear the man outside making those disturbing sounds. Each high-pitched cry seemed to penetrate deeper into her mind, amplifying her terror. The arrival of help. Minutes felt like hours until she finally heard sirens approaching. The sound of police cars pulling up outside brought a flicker of hope to Emily's heart. She peered through her window once more and saw officers confronting the man on her patio. They shouted questions at him. "What are you doing? Get over here." To Emily's horror, he didn't respond. Instead, he continued his bizarre behavior, his cries growing louder and more frantic in response to their presence. The officers moved cautiously toward him, trying to assess the situation without provoking him further. After what felt like an eternity, they managed to subdue him and led him away from her home. A male officer later returned to speak with Emily and her mother when she arrived back home. The explanation: the officer explained that the man had been diagnosed with severe autism and had escaped from a nearby facility for mentally challenged individuals. He had lived in their house years ago before being forced to move when his caretaker, his mother, passed away. The man likely thought he would find comfort in his old home during this festive season. Emily felt a mix of fear and sympathy as she processed this information. The officer assured them that they would ensure he wouldn't return without proper supervision. A shocking return. Despite the initial relief of having avoided danger that night, Emily's life was forever altered by that encounter. For weeks afterward, she struggled to sleep, haunted by memories of that terrifying figure on her patio. Years passed without incident until one morning when Emily, now an adult, was enjoying coffee on her patio. She noticed a familiar figure standing by her fence. It was the same man from so many years ago. His hair had turned gray, but those unsettling high-pitched sounds pierced through time like a ghost from her childhood. Her heart raced as memories flooded back. He must have escaped again. But instead of running away in fear this time, Emily felt compassion swell within her. She cautiously approached him and asked if he wanted to come down to the patio. To her surprise, he jumped over the fence eagerly but didn't show any signs of aggression. His name was Tom, and after their initial awkward interaction turned into genuine conversation, they formed an unexpected bond, a new friendship. From that day forward, Tom became a regular visitor in Emily's life. With the help of caretakers who accompanied him each week, they would sit together on the patio watching cartoons. A simple joy that brought warmth back into both their lives. What began as a horrifying encounter transformed into a heartwarming friendship. One that taught Emily about compassion and understanding for those who are different. No longer did she think of Tom as just the man on my patio. He became a cherished friend who reminded her that even in darkness, there can be light if we choose to see it. In retrospect, that Christmas Eve incident could have been merely terrifying. Instead, it evolved into an unexpected connection that changed both their lives forever. A story not just about fear, but about acceptance and friendship forged in unusual circumstances. I hope you have listened to these stories from start to end. Share your thoughts and opinion in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Horror Vault channel to keep watching such true horror stories regularly.